I grew up in a small town in northeastern California called Cedarville, a town of 600. And I think it kind of prepared me for what I was going to find out in the military. The Vietnam War was just starting, but I got a deferment as long as I stayed in college. But when I graduated, then I was fair game to be drafted, and I knew I was going to be drafted. The Army got me first and sent me to Fort Ord. And basic training to me was a fairly mundane thing. It wasn't hard for me. I grew up camping and hunting and fishing, and everything was pretty easy. I found out I was going to Fort Carson, Colorado to be trained as a radio operator. Now, I have no idea how they determined whether I had any adaptability to be a radio operator, but it was a code training. It took about 8 weeks. I also got notice that I got 2 weeks leave to go home at Christmas. And I no more than got home than I got a phone call saying I had 36 hours to get back to Fort Carson because I was being shipped out to Vietnam. Arriving in Saigon, my mother was terrified. I was going to Vietnam, you know. It was just a mass of humanity. I mean, people going every direction, and the traffic was nonstop, and it was like a bunch of kamikaze drivers with the horns blaring and cars going everywhere. There was just, the streets smelled like urine, they smelled like cooking food, they smelled like all kinds of different smells. What I didn't know, or what I began to realize as we got into orientation, is some of us were going to be sent someplace that was very dangerous, and some of us were going to have the luck of the draw and get places that weren't quite so dangerous, because we were not in a full-scale war. When we landed at Busan Airport, which was outside of Phan Rang, we landed and there was just a cupola of a building there, and the pilot taxied up and there was nobody around, not a soul at the airport. And I was supposed to be going to be picked up at the time. Well, the pilot assured me that they had called Phan Rang and somebody was coming to get me, but nobody showed up and nobody showed up. And finally, he had to, somewhere he had to be. He said, I just have to leave, but they're on their way and should be here any minute. And I was standing here underneath this cupola with nothing, nobody around anywhere, thinking, we're at war. I don't have a gun, I don't have anything, you know. But suddenly I saw this Jeep coming up and they picked me up. It was Major Alford, who was the second in command at Phan Rang. And once we got there, it was just like going to work every day. Most of us people who had been drafted were really in one of the most important positions in anywhere Vietnam, because we were supposed to keep the communications up between all of the MAG units around there. I found out that this was the same all over Vietnam. Us lesser ranked young men were all providing the vital communication between all of these other units. And it was at the time just seemed like a job to me, but I got to think about it afterwards, how important that was to have us there. During the year that I was there, things started to escalate in Vietnam. There was a lot of political and uprising within Vietnam itself. It was obvious that some of the provinces that were considered pretty much pacified were now being infiltrated by Viet Cong. I lost a fraternity brother and a good friend named Jerry Markham, who was a first lieutenant in firefights that were going on while I was in Saigon. And later in the war, a really close friend, Captain Bergen, was killed right after I left Vietnam. He was flying reconnaissance in a small plane and was shot down and killed. I was supposed to get out in January, and I received a notice that I was supposed to be in Saigon the next day or the next week, and went to Saigon. I was in Saigon overnight, flew by fancy jet this time back to Travis Air Force Base. I was there one day, I was out of the Army. just that quick. It didn't feel like war, I have to tell you that, from my standpoint. Even though you'd hear things were going on somewhere else, it just didn't feel like war to me. And the people, you know, the people that I met were just going about their lives like ordinary, you know. In Phan Rang, nobody talked very much about, through the interpreters, much about the war. They were more interested in what's happening with their families.